In many ancient cultures and religious traditions, rulers and elite members of society not only had wives, but they also had concubines. Concubines normally serve a dual purpose: to increase a man's prestige through his capacity to produce children and, of course, limitless opportunities to indulge in sexual desires. Most people associate concubines with ancient China, where emperors were known to have kept thousands of concubines. However, the practice of taking concubines is certainly not exclusive to China. In today's video, we will be showing you life of a Chinese concubine. Without further ado, let's begin. The practice of taking a concubine goes back thousands of years to the civilizations of ancient Mesopotamia and Babylonia, where the elite members of society took concubines, many of whom were slaves. However, the first wife always retained a place of primacy in the family. In some city-states, women served as priestesses and held a very high social rank. Generally, these women did not marry. In some Mesopotamian cultures, men would visit these women as prostitutes, which society not only condoned but considered an honorable fulfillment of religious duty, regardless of the marital status of the man. Concubines and Religion. Concubines appeared in the Bible as well. The Israelites often kept concubines in addition to their wives. Wives had dowries, but concubines did not, and this was the chief method of distinguishing between the two social positions. One of the most famous keepers of concubines in the Bible was King Solomon, 1011 to 931 before Christ, who is said to have 300 concubines in addition to his 700 wives. While concubinage is not acceptable in Christianity today, some Bible commentators have suggested that God allowed men to have more than one wife or several concubines during the period from the Great Flood until the Old Covenant in order to build up the world's population. In Judaism, concubines are referred to by the Hebrew term palagish, meaning a mistress staying in the house. According to the Babylonian Talmud, the difference between a concubine and a full wife was that the latter received a marriage contract, and her marriage was preceded by a formal betrothal. Neither was the case for a concubine. Certain Jewish thinkers, such as Maimonides, believed that concubines were strictly reserved for kings, and thus that a commoner may not have a concubine. Indeed, such thinkers argued that commoners may not engage in any type of sexual relations outside of marriage. In Islam, taking a concubine was also permitted. Chapter 4, verse 3 of the Quran states that a man may be married to a maximum of 4 women if he can treat them with justice, and if he is unable to be just among plural wives, he may marry only one woman or depend on his slave woman. Concubinage was considered acceptable as a social need only under certain guidelines. In ancient times, 2 sources for concubines were permitted under an Islamic regime. Primarily, non-Muslim women taken as prisoners of war were made concubines, as happened after the Battle of Bani Qurayza. Alternately, in ancient, pagan or pre-Islamic times, the sale and purchase of human slaves was a socially legal exercise. However, upon embracing Islam, it was encouraged to free slave women or bring them into formal marriage. The historian al-Tabari calculated that the Prophet Muhammad married a total of 15 women, though only ever 11 at one time, and had at least 4 concubines. All of Muhammad's concubines were his slaves. According to records, Muhammad used to visit all 11 of his wives in one night, the Ming Dynasty concubines. A life of abuse, torture, and murder for thousands of women. When concubines fought back, the plot to eliminate a mad and sadistic emperor, 20,000 women, and 100,000 castrated men to serve the emperor, the imperial harem of China. Concubines around the world. In ancient Greece, the practice of keeping a slave concubine was little recorded but appears throughout Athenian history. Law prescribed that a man could kill another man caught attempting a relationship with his concubine for the production of free children, which suggests that a concubine's children were not granted citizenship. Under Roman law, concubinage was tolerated as the relationship was durable and exclusive. The practice allowed a Roman man to enter into an informal but recognized relationship with a woman who was not his wife, most often a woman whose lower social status was an obstacle to marriage. It was not considered derogatory to be called a concubine, as the title was often inscribed on tombstones. A concubine was a young male slave chosen by his master as his sexual partner. Romans did not mark same-sex relations as homosexual if an adult male used a slave or prostitute, characteristically in youth, as his passive partner. These relations, however, were expected to play a secondary role in marriage, within which institution an adult male demonstrated his masculine authority as head of the household. The Chinese emperors kept concubines with them in the Forbidden City, and by the Qing dynasty, there were around 20,000. The imperial concubines were guarded by an equally obscene number of eunuchs, men who were castrated, to ensure that they couldn't be made pregnant by anybody except the emperor. In many stories, the concubines were taken by force and sold into their life, but this was not always the case. It was not uncommon in some cultures for poorer families to present their daughters to a ruler in order to see if they would be chosen as a concubine. The daily life of a concubine in the Forbidden City. The internal hierarchy was firm and inflexible, and consorts would fiercely guard their unofficial ranking and do virtually anything to advance. Jealousy and bickering between concubines were rampant and ensured that daily life was far from a life of pleasant leisure. Spending a night with the emperor was hard to come by due to the high number of consorts available, so concubines would compete vehemently against each other. While in the service of the palace, no concubine was allowed to communicate with the outside world, not in person, and not even by mail. China's last concubine. As China's last imperial consort, Lai Yukin was enslaved from the age of 15. This was back in 1943, when Puyi's empress, Wanrong, was all but destroyed by opium. His first concubine had divorced him, and a second concubine had died in mysterious circumstances. The emperor's minders decided that Puyi needed a new consort, and he was invited to take his pick from photographs of local schoolgirls. He chose Lai Yukin, who was plucked from her home and told she was going to the palace to learn and study. The young girl did not realize what awaited her. Because I thought I went there to study, I even took my school bag. I was very innocent then, thinking I could flee back if I didn't like it. In fact, it was absolutely impossible to escape, said Lai Yukin. Lai remained benevolent in her judgment of Puyi, who was finally released from prison in 1959 and sent to work in Peking's botanical gardens until he died, childless of cancer in 1967. Puyi has many aspects. He was timid, suspicious, irritable. But as a human being, he also suffered a lot of pain and misery much heavier than the common people's, she said. Lai Yukin was the last female consort of the final emperor of China. While concubinage has been stamped out in many religions and cultures around the world, it still lives on in many countries today. So guys, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. For more interesting content, give this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more awesome content. Have a nice day, and I will see you in the next video.